Okay, so what housing policy existed in the past?
So in Canada, we had virtually no government assisted housing until the end of the Second World War. If you were low income before the Second World War, you were in trouble. You were on your own largely. Family usually helped. Sometimes churches did, but you were largely on your own. There was probably a lot of couch surfing and doubling up back then. The Second World War changed all this in Canada. And by the way, a great authoritative source on all this is this book, Greg Sutter, Still Renovating, A History of Canadian Social Housing Policy, published by McGill Queen's University Press in 2016. I strongly recommend it. Greg is a longtime housing policy mentor of mine. Prior to the Second World War, there was nothing government assisted in Canada, very little. And then that changed during the Second World War for a variety of reasons. One is we had a lot of civilians engaged in the war effort who needed government assisted housing in order to work in key industries. So we had key workers needed to do things like make munitions and make supplies for soldiers overseas. We had to quickly round up workers to be physically present and to participate in the war effort. So quickly government said, we're going to create something called wartime housing. And I still see wartime housing in every city I go to. There are these distinct roofs that come down. What's key about wartime housing is that they were made quickly and cheaply, and they're kind of like cottages. They don't have as many rooms as a lot of houses. They don't have the square footage, and they look a bit like a cottage. So that was a start. And then when veterans returned from the Second World War, I would like to tell you that the government said, we're building housing for you because you fought for your country. That's not exactly what happened. Veterans came back and didn't have housing and fought for it. They had to fight overseas, and they had to fight again domestically with their own government and force the government in Canada to produce wartime housing for them as well. So we had wartime housing for people participating in the war effort locally, and then we had returning soldiers, and we had wartime housing for them, but only after a fight, only after they really advocated hard for their needs. Kevin Brichette, a scholar at the Royal Military College of Canada, has written about this. He's written a great historical piece on this that I can share with you if you want. And then other things happened. We had something in the 1960s called the creation of Canada's social welfare system. In the 60s and 70s, we spent substantial amounts on social protection for vulnerable people across Canada. And that was the real birth of Canadian social policy and Canadian social housing policy as well. And so it's in the 60s and 70s where something like 20 to 30,000 units of social housing were built every year in Canada. And we had long-term funding agreements from senior orders of government. We had provincial and territorial governments engaged. We had the federal government active in it. We had we had cabinet ministers who were very strong on housing and who really wanted to rebuild the downtowns of their cities. And then with neoliberalism in the 1990s, that stopped. The 1990s were very dark years of housing policy in Canada. Senior orders of government were very reluctant to spend money. Social housing became out of vogue, and they were very dark years for Canadian housing policy. And now that's been changing over the past 20 years. Since the early 2000s, senior orders of government have been gradually getting back into social housing.